Friends of the CFF site, welcome into another show. My name is Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the CFF site. And on this show, I'm going to have three friends back. If you have been following me on the site throughout spring and throughout summer, you know that I'm participating in a series of best ball drafts. We did one in April, one in May. We just finished up one in June. We have another scheduled for July and then another in August right before the season starts. And at the end of the May draft, we sort of had a post-draft analysis show where I welcomed three friends in, Chris K, Nate Marchese, and Andrew Katz. We did about an hour show with those guys, got a lot of great feedback on that. So decided after the June draft, it would be great to bring them back in and really continue our conversation from May and do it now in June, now that we have another draft under our belt. So they're going to give you some insights, some of their insights on their picks, what they're seeing happening throughout these drafts. I'm going to do the same. We're going to identify trends that we see going on, maybe philosophies that we see happening within the drafts that we're doing. So that's the purpose of the show tonight. At Chris K, you can find him on Twitter at @RealistChrisK. My friend Nate Marchese, you can find him on Twitter at CFFNate. And Andrew Katz, you can find him on Twitter at Andrew P. Katz. Give them all a follow. They actually send out a lot of information for college fantasy football, do a lot of college fantasy football takes throughout the spring, throughout the summer, and really all year long. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome the guys in. So guys, welcome in. We're in full screen mode now, and I just want everyone to put a face with the name up in that left-hand corner. We've got Andrew Katz. Andrew, welcome in. Below me, we've got Nate Marchese. Nate, welcome back again. And then diagonal from me, bottom left, we've got Chris K. Everybody joining us back. We did this in May. We're going to do it again now at the end of the June draft. And so, that's where things stand, guys. We've done three drafts now. We've had a chance to kind of really identify some trends. And really, we're just going to kind of start there because this was a little bit different draft for some of you guys. You three had some of the earlier picks in the first two drafts that we did. And I look at this now and I think, Chris, you had, you picked number maybe 8?
6.
No, 6. That's right. Okay. You had 6. Nate, you had 12. You were at the elbow. And Andrew, you were 9. So, I mean, Chris, you went from 1 and 2 the first draft to 6. Nate, you went from 3 and 1 to 12. And then Andrew, you went from 4 and 4 to 9. So Chris, let's just kind of start with you. Any difference in philosophy drafting at the 6 hole after being 1 and 2? Obviously, you weren't going to get one of your top 2, right?
Right.
What was your strategy going into this one?
I wanted to try receivers heavy early, which is what I did, and it worked kind of perfectly because at pick 6, I feel like going receiver and pick 1 through 4 doesn't necessarily make sense. Rondale, maybe, Chase, maybe, but I ended up going to Roberson, which I'll probably get into in a little bit here, but. Pick 6 was a good spot to go receiver. I'll probably talk about it a little bit. Roberson, I really like. Hindsight, I probably should have gone Rondale or Chase at the very least, but it worked to my advantage to want to go receiver. And honestly, I probably would have benefited even more going something like Andrew or Nate here, 9 or 12, because a lot of options there at receiver for what I wanted to do, which was go heavy receiver early.
Yeah, Andrew, let's go to you because you were back up. You were up at 9. The interesting thing for you at 9 is that, and we can get into the picks. So I'll kind of save that. But being in the non-spot, how did you go into it expectation-wise into this draft, knowing that you had the 4th pick in both of the first 2?
So I tackled this draft a little differently than I have either of the first 2, and just kind of shifted my philosophy away from going into a draft based on rankings, whether it be in my head or just based on what I've been able to get to and in terms of pre-ranking. And I actually instead tried to come up with a decision tree based on where I was picking in a given round, who I wanted to get there, and if that person was not there, who I wanted to get after that, and kind of went 3 or 4 or 5 deep at each position. So I was again, I guess we'll get into the picks in a little bit, but I had a pretty definitive plan on my first 6 picks, and I got 4 of those guys. But one of the guys I wanted was Roberson, so that was kind of annoying. but I'll take Rondell as a
I'll make a trade. I'll make a trade. What do you think?
I'll take Rondell.
Now, Nate, what's interesting is that you were on the elbow for the second draft in a row. You had the first pick last draft. You went to 12 this time. Elbow's a nice spot, particularly in a best ball draft, because sometimes you can get handcuff situations in some of those maybe quarterback battles that aren't decided or whatnot. I think you might have done that with the Utah running back position in the last draft, if I remember correctly. Yeah. What were you thinking here being at 12 as opposed to being at 1 last time?
Yeah, elbows again. You gotta. I really like that position in the best ball draft. And yeah, there was a handful of guys that I was taking a look at to do the handcuff situation with. Funny enough that I actually thought that Reggie Roberson was going to be my first pick. I thought he might work his way down the draft board. I was like, okay, finally I'm going to get my hands on at least a share of Reggie Roberson throughout these best ball drafts. So that didn't happen. Not too upset about it because a couple other guys felt to me that I kind of liked. So, but yeah, it was a lot of the same as whenever I had the 1 spot in our last draft, and just trying to work those. Unfortunately, in this particular one, we'll probably talk about it later on, but a little bit of that strategy fell apart as guys were taken right as I was about to start a little bit of the handcuff action.
Yeah, I think now that we're drafting with the same guys, I mean, for those of you all that don't know, let me just tee it up. These are 12-team, 26-round drafts. We start 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, 2 flex, and then a tight end, and then defense special teams. And we incorporate kickers into our defense special teams, which I recommend for everyone to do, because who wants to draft individual kickers? So we start to develop, we start to realize as these drafts, this is the 3rd one, where we know who some of the guys like now. And so either you know that you're not going to get them at the value in which you have tagged on them, or you've kind of go, you kind of have to go up early to get them at a particular spot that, earlier than what you think you might want to, if you really want to go ahead and get a player. So we're going to go ahead and get into the picks. And what's funny is I love analyzing the draft as much as I do anything else, because it's like analyzing fantasy players throughout the offseason. So I feel like I have a good bead on you guys, on the way that you guys like to draft philosophically, or at least the way things have gone so far. So, Andrew, I'm going to kind of start with you, because I think this is sort of an easy one, but we'll see, because you mentioned your love for Roberson. But the last draft, you had the 4th pick, you got Rondale Moore. So I would imagine if you got him in the 4 hole, you had to be pretty pleased to get him in the 9 spot in this draft, even though you might have wanted Roberson, right?
Yeah, when Roberson went off the board, so first of all, I knew that in my first 6 picks, I wanted 2 receivers, 2 running backs, and 2 quarterbacks. And I was hoping to land Pickens on the way back, but I was kind of at a loss because I pretty much figured that I was going to get Roberson at 9. It was a done deal. So while I had a lot of decisions on my subsequent picks kind of thought through, that one wasn't one of them. So I started going through who was still there, and I was like, Rondale's still there. Let's do it. It felt like it was good value if you can get that in the first round, I guess. So overall, I was pleased.
Now, with Rondale Moore, getting him in both drafts, obviously you mentioned that you thought maybe Roberson. Did you say earlier that you thought maybe you were going to get Roberson?
Yeah, that was my plan for the first round.
Is that your top 2? Are Moore and Roberson your top 2? Where do you see Jafar Chase falling in this pecking order?
I would slot Chase below both of them, I think. While there's variability at the quarterback position for both Moore and Chase, I think that just Moore's ability, once the ball's in his hands, to make anything happen on any play, makes me feel a little more easy about the uncertainty at the quarterback position for Purdue. I do have faith in Brennan as a player, but I think the bigger loss there is Joe Brady, and I question how that's going to affect the LSU offense overall. So when I think about just how the variables shake out and what I think is more of a certainty, I definitely think Moore is more of a certainty, no pun intended. And I definitely see Roberson stepping up and being as much of a high high floor, high ceiling player as we see at the receiver position.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's a little. I've moved a little bit in the opposite direction with Jafar Chase. I was actually a little lower on him after, in April, and the more I hear and read and get info on Brennan, I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable with him, and I think that's why for me, I actually chose Jafar Chase with my first pick right there in the first round. For me, I kind of feel a little bit opposite, but let's say we're kind of splitting hairs with those guys, but sticking on the theme of receivers, because I think if there's one thing we can all agree with is that the receivers are really targeted early in these drafts. And Chris, here's a real interesting stat for you. In the 3 drafts that we have done so far, you're the only guy that have selected a wide receiver with each of your first 4 picks in one of the drafts. You did that in this draft. You mentioned at the top of the show that you were targeting wide receivers early.
Yep.
But not only did you target wide receivers early, in all 3 drafts combined, you've taken 13 wide receivers in the first 8 rounds. If you add up the 8 rounds of all 3 drafts, you've taken 13 wide receivers in your 24 picks. So you've been pretty consistent with the wide receiver theory, even though you went a little heavier on this one. That's still been a consistent theme for you throughout these drafts.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it, like the quarterbacks, and we should get into it more later on with the quarterbacks. And I kind of tweeted about it yesterday, but like there's a really great sweet spot. And I think as much as I don't want to admit it, Kyle, franchise K, has like a great point. There's a ton of great quarterbacks at the end. I don't think as late as he wanted to right here, but in this one, but like tons of upside guys. I think that kind of impacted my Roberson pick over like a guy like Rondale and Chase, whose upside I think we can all agree is higher than Roberson's. But I just knew going 4 receivers early, I needed a guy that's going to give me, if you look at his like 12 games, let's say last year, it's like 60, 63, 64 catches, 1,200 yards, 10 or 12 touchdowns. Like I needed going 4 receivers early. I needed those guys to be rostered pretty much every single time they're playing. Based on the rest, but a lot of running back depth, a lot of quarterback depth, and I just knew some of those guys, like an Adams, like a Terry, like I took. All those guys have big upside, and then I kind of took Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's kind of been a guy I've liked since he came in, but thought he had like a good high floor. His upside probably a little bit limited. I don't see him like a huge Pittman type guy. I think maybe like Vaughns can fall into that, but I think he went a little bit before St. Brown, but think like a high floor of St. Brown was nice for my strategy of going heavy receiver early.
Yeah, just to kind of tee it up and let everyone know, in the first 4 rounds, you went Roberson, Tamori and Terry, Jonathan Adams at Arkansas State, and Amon-Ra St. Brown at USC. I had St. Brown. I took him in one of the earlier drafts we had this summer. I think we touched on it a little bit. I think USC had 3 receivers catch over 70 passes this year. So they may not necessarily have a star that just absolutely explodes like maybe Pittman did last year. But the floor for those guys are so high that it's hard to stay away from, particularly at maybe a wide receiver 3 or a flex option, because I did something a little different in this draft as well. I went wide receiver early, and, I went Jafar Chase, Marquez Stevenson, and De'Ami Brown at North Carolina. And, I'm going to say this because this sort of was my old school philosophy. I've been doing college fantasy football for a long time, and I've always felt, back as far as 10, 12 years ago, with the website, I've been playing a lot longer than that, but with the CFF site, I've been associated with college fantasy football for 10 years. I always thought that I wanted to target the top receivers early because 10 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, there weren't many great receivers. There weren't as many prolific passing attacks as there are now. So if you think of the days, I remember 10 years ago, I was doing mock drafts that were published in Athlon magazine, and I was targeting Ryan Broyles in the first round at Oklahoma. I remember there was days where I was targeting Justin Blackman, Oklahoma State, Michael Crabtree at Texas Tech. Chris, with what we're seeing now, wouldn't you agree that there is a lot more passing, and so the level, the tiers of wide receiver, there's just more receivers to jump on earlier. There's no more. It's no longer 1 or 2 or 3 guys anymore. I think there's good value within the top 10 or 12 at receiver.
Yeah, I think all three of the guys you took could pop for 30+ fantasy points. I mean, like the upside on these guys is incredible. Like a Stevenson, are you kidding? Like that guy could go, especially with how they use him at Houston, or even kind of rushing it a little bit. Like they use him a ton. I think, like you said, 10 years ago, it's a little bit different. They don't, the volume isn't there. So you need to hit on those high guys. But, like a Tamari and Terry, like, dude is averaging like 25 yards a catch. Like it's incredible.
Yeah,
So yeah,
just to throw this out there,
format.
I actually got Stevenson in the second draft. I got Stevenson in his third draft. You took Stevenson in the first draft when you were drafting in the one hole. I took Justin Henderson in round 2. Had I known then what I know now, I could have sat on Justin Henderson and got him in the third, and Marquez Stevenson would have probably been my pick in the second round of that draft. But this is where we draft with one another often now. We know the tendencies, but Stevenson was probably one of those guys that I probably should have in all 3 drafts. And now that the dumpster fire is out, hopefully at Houston, like you said, I think Marquez Stevenson, I'm looking for a big year from him. Now, we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit and go over to you, Nate, because we mentioned that you went from drafting in the one hole last draft to drafting 12 here. What's interesting is that was it in the first 2 drafts, you didn't pick a quarterback in the first 2 rounds in any of those drafts, but you went ahead and picked a quarterback in this draft in 2 of your first 3 rounds. So that was a little different than what you've done in the first 2 drafts. What was your thought there? Let's say the quarterbacks you took Spencer Rattler at the end of the first round, can't argue there, and then you came back and took Asher O'Hara at the end of round 3. So difference of philosophy for you, at least from a quarterback standpoint in these 2 drafts, was that based on where you were picking, or was just you like these players at those values at that spot?
Both, short answer. Like I said, I fully intended on taking Roberson, thinking that he dropped to me with the last pick in the first round. My backup plan was Spencer Rattler. I knew that if he made it by Heisey, I was hoping Heisey would actually take Sam Howell, which he did. And I knew that meant, since we knew Kyle wasn't drafting a quarterback, I was like, all right, I'm going to be able to get Rattler here. So I went ahead and pulled the trigger on Rattler. And then Kobe Lewis was my second round pick on the elbow there. So back-to-back Rattler and Kobe Lewis out of Central Michigan. But yeah, so part of it was I knew that wide receivers were going to be going like crazy. That's just kind of been our tendency in the last couple of drafts. And it was kind of a zig when everybody else zags type scenario where I was like, okay, I know that a lot of people are going to wait on quarterbacks. I'm going to go ahead and pick out a couple that I really like in these spots. So I did it there. The only problem with that strategy is there's a reason why everybody's going after wide receivers early, because there's a lot of good ones in that tier, those first 10 to 12, but then there's also a shelf where we start to see a little bit of a drop. So that was kind of just my ideas with that. Sometimes it works out, sometimes not so much.
Well, sticking with the wide receiver theme, Andrew, you mentioned this name as well. You were looking at Pickens, and I know you were, because you took him in a couple of drafts. I think you have him in 2 drafts, right? In the first draft, did you get Pickens in this draft?
I did get him in the second round.
You did. Okay, so you got him in the first draft. You got him in this draft. And in draft number 2, he was picked 2 spots ahead of you. And I'm thinking you like George Pickens that much. You probably would have had him in all 3 drafts had he probably slipped to you at that point. You obviously like Pickens. We can get into it a little bit later. You have a love for Georgia, as I can tell from some of your picks. But we'll start with Pickens first, because second round, maybe at the end of last year or even at the beginning of the spring, I'm not sure many of us were really looking at Pickens this early as a second round pick. What are you seeing there? What are you feeling there? What's your thought with Pickens in round 2?
So I don't have the May draft in front of me now, but you're 100% right that I would have taken him if he was there. And I think Kyle's gotten me in a couple of drafts now where he's gotten him in front of me, which is annoying, because otherwise I'd have him across the board in all my leagues. But I would say you can sum up my infatuation with him through a couple different layers. One, I'm a big Georgia fan, so hold that against me. But additionally, the way he closed down the stretch, not just in the bowl game where he put up an absurd stat line, but just seeing some of the plays that he made in the LSU game and some of the other games down the stretch, you could really see that his high recruiting rank starting to come to fruition on the field. But I think the biggest thing for me is that I'm all in on Todd Monken getting full control of the offense and turning that offense into something representative of what we saw at LSU this year. I think that the script's going to be totally flipped, and that I have no reason other than game script just being totally in against that offense putting up a ton of points to believe otherwise.
Well, it shows in your philosophy because let me just throw this out there. Zamir White, you've taken him now in two of the three drafts. We talk about the drafts that we just did. You took Pickens in round 2. You came back and took Jamie Newman in round 3. And then Zamir White in round 9. So you got 3 Georgia players within the first 9 picks. So that plays into your philosophy. You've got a lot of stock in that Georgia offense. I was hoping you'd get into why. For a lot of people that, the casuals that may tune in from time to time, all of a sudden, man, this guy's got 3 Georgia players and they're thinking Georgia from 2019. Obviously, Georgia is going to be a different monster in 2020. So I'm glad you pointed that out. But that kind of plays in to why you did what you did. And so I get that. So,
hey, Joe,
is it you feel obviously Newman, Zamir White, you feel that's the one for me that I'm not 100%. I'm good with Newman. I'm good with Pickens. I like Zamir White. I think we might have talked about this on the last show. I'm a little concerned about getting him too high because I don't know how much he's going to get used. What's your thoughts with Zamir White?
So I entered the offseason thinking that he would be an easy fade for me because I expected him to be going off the board in the range that we have seen Georgia running backs going off in the past, which is like easily top 2, 3, 4 rounds. But we've seen him, I think, go anywhere from, I think taking him in round 9 is probably the highest we've seen, but we've seen him fall like into early double digits and even up until like round 15. So, and if I could go back and redo it, maybe I don't take him quite as early as 9 because he probably falls a little more. But given his recruiting stock, given that we saw him get back healthy in the field, and I didn't think that he was quite as explosive as I expected last year, but I think another year removed from his ACL injuries, coupled with just what he is supposed to become, and just starting to see him start to get healthier and healthier. If he gets anything representative of a 1A type role in that system, I think that there's a lot of profit potential there.
Any of you guys have had anything else to add in regards to Georgia?
I wanted to ask really quickly and get everybody's opinion so we could put it in public territory. Joe, do you agree with like Pickens Newman value at 2-3, or where do you see their value at? Because me personally, I think Pickens is one of those typical Georgia receivers that's a superstar. He's gonna be a stud in the NFL, and he's just gonna be stuck in the Georgia ways of like 60 catches and 800 yards and 8 TDs because that's just what they do. And I want to hear Nate too. I want to hear your opinion too.
I'll go first on this. I probably won't have any shares of Pickens or Newman if those two guys are going in the first 3 rounds of all of these drafts. I kind of have my set in stone for me is the fact that I like the running backs, the Hubbards, the Pattersons, the ATN, and Gainwell. For me, that's the top 4. At quarterback, you've got Fields, and you've probably got Ellinger, and then you've probably got Rondale Moore, Ja'Marr Chase, and to me, that is in any particular order the guys that I would be targeting in the first round first. And then from there, it's sort of personal preference for me, and I can go with a Rattler. I almost took Rattler instead of Ja'Marr Chase but I knew receivers were going to go early, and I needed to get that. And we've been talking about how deep quarterback was. But for me, just to deal with this question, I'm not going to have any Newman or Pickens if they're gone by round 3. For me, that's too early for my liking. I don't know what you feel about that, Nate.
I would probably lean more towards Andrew's side on this, honestly. I do have quite a bit of faith in what Monken does. I honestly think that it's just a good fit between Newman and Pickens. One, there's the gap between Pickens and the wide receiver 2 at Georgia is pretty significant. So I do think he's going to see the lion's share of targets there. And like I was saying, with the fit, Pickens does a really good job of getting open downfield. And Jamie Newman throws a pretty elite deep ball. That's one thing he does do very well. He throws a really nice deep ball. So I think those two are a good fit. My biggest concern with that, and the thing where I find myself pumping the brakes just a little bit, is that he misses one of the key things that I look for in an elite wide receiver. One, you got to be a wide receiver 1. He clears that. They need to be an up-tempo, throw it around type offense. That's good. I think Monken will bring that. But I do think that they lack that shootout mentality because their defense is so good. He's going to be sitting a lot of second halves, and there's going to be a lot of games where they're going to be up 24-0 before he's even had a chance to get in the end zone. And I worry that he will miss out on some weeks because of that. That's my biggest concern with him.
Yeah, and I think that was a concern I brought up maybe in our May show for me with Zamir White, with getting him too early, coming off of 2 ACL tears. I know Georgia starts fast. They have 2 games, Alabama in week 3. I think they come out with another tough opponent in week 1. And I just worry when Georgia gets out of that tougher part of the schedule, are we really going to see Zamir White getting more than 15 carries a game? And for me, I like high volume guys. But here's another question too. If we're, Andrew, if you really like this Monken offense, I think we're all in agreement that Monken's going to come in there and really turn it up a bit, right? Are we sleeping a little bit on somebody like maybe Trey McKitty at tight end? Because nobody's really been going up to get him. For as much as Zamir White, George Pickens, and Newman have gone up, nobody's really gone up to really grab McKitty, the graduate transfer tight end from Florida State. Are we sleeping on him a little bit?
I certainly am, because I haven't tried the thought of crossing it, or the thought of drafting a Georgia tight end hadn't entered my mindset yet. But I'm more interested, and I haven't done the appropriate level of research yet, in trying to figure out who the WR2 is going to be in that system. Presumably, once he gets healthy, it'll be Blaylock, but leading up until that, but that could be like the first couple months without him, considering I think he tore his ACL in the SEC championship game. So whoever, I think that will be one of the more interesting components of the offense. But
maybe Roberson gets going.
Yeah, I mean, in year 5.
Right. I actually had him as a keeper out at Cal in a league, P5 only league, after his freshman year. I was like, this is it. This is going to be a phenomenal freshman. I'm going to have 3 more years of this guy. And no.
Yeah. I was working at the College Football Hall of Fame when he committed to Cal there with like a painting of a bear. Very, very interesting. But you've reached peak 2020 off season when we get a Trey McKitty name drop. So thank you for that, Joe. I think we get a great point though. Like a receiver too, if we really believe Monken's going to be like really change the offense, who's the receiver 2, and why are we not nabbing him as an upside guy at the end? Because we see all these drastic changes in offenses. I mean, how many receivers deep can these teams go? And the answer is 2, sometimes 3 times in value, especially if you're picking.
The best ball component makes it so tough to take a shot like that, though, just considering that there's no waivers or anything. So where there's that much uncertainty, maybe you have like a 20-25% hit rate on that. And
I think the problem there is that what's his name, Dominic Blaylock, is a guy that you would say, receiver 2, lots of talent. He looked good last year, but he's hurt. So like, we don't know what we're going to get. If we thought he was healthy from day 1, then I think we see people take chances. But now it's like, who's going to pop up early?
I would have taken him in round 8.
So Andrew, you brought up an interesting point, and we'll go, we'll kind of go around the table on this one, because the interesting point you bring up in best ball, there are no waivers. And I argue that sometimes late, it's better to take somebody, say maybe, and I throw Spencer Brown's name out there again, that might be safe for 100 yards and 10 could get 100 yards and 10 touchdowns, or 1,000 yards, 10 touchdown guy. Or do you go somebody that maybe has a low floor, high ceiling? I tend to, in these best ball drafts, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, I'm not the guy that's going to get great grades at any of my drafts because I tend to take the players that I feel could give me the higher ceilings, but they may be the guys that absolutely bust. And you're right. There are no waivers in best ball. Andrew, I'll start with you on this. Is that kind of how you see it? Because you kind of brought that up.
So in our previous drafts, I definitely gravitated more towards floor and found myself taking a lot of guys that I couldn't understand why they were falling because they seemed like they had so much certainty surrounding their profiles, like Shamari Brooks, for example. But I pivoted in my strategy a little bit this time in a couple different ways. So I took some more shots, but I intentionally did not try and handcuff any of those shots, thinking that I likely have the higher weighted side of the coin. And if I take maybe 5 shots at running back and I have a chance for maybe like 4 of them to hit, as opposed to doing a couple of handcuffs, I felt like I was potentially limiting the upside of my team just by handcuffing in that scenario. So in a roundabout way of answering your question, I shot for more upside here, but I try to do it in a way that I had that upside wasn't wrapped around uncertainty. It was something that it was coin flips that I believed I could win, and I took enough of them where I hopefully will land on the right side of the coin and capture that upside in a way that manifests in a great team.
I think I made a comment in the chat section at one point during the draft. I think after we get past the first 5 or 6 rounds, the next 7 or 8 rounds, I feel everybody, you may as well just put names in a hat and pick. And then from rounds 15 plus are probably going to be the ones that sort of tip the scale. Nate, for you tend to lean higher ceiling, higher floor, find because I think that's really the ultimate. I think that's the ultimate decision that we try to make in some of these best ball drafts.
Yeah, no, I absolutely am somebody that I'm just kind of a gambler by nature. So I'm going to take the higher ceiling guy 9 times out of 10. Part of that's going to depend on kind of the configuration of my team. If I feel like I've taken a bunch of high risk guys, then you may see me towards the very end start taking some guys that have a little bit higher floor. But most of the time I'm going to take the high risk guy, and I tend to lean even more that way in a best ball scenario. Just because one, we've got a lot of really, big time fantasy guys that are playing in this league to begin with. So I feel like you got to really get after your guys that you think have a high ceiling. But 2, there's just, when there's no waiver wire and none of that, I mean, there's just so much uncertainty, and there's going to be so many misses within this draft afterwards, just because there is no waiver wire. So yeah, I always tend to shoot high.
So look, let's switch gears a little bit and go to some trends, right? Because one thing I like to do is I like to look at the grid. I have all the grids of the drafts in front of me, so I probably have a little bit that you guys don't have if you don't have them in front. But Nate, we'll just kind of stay with you because we mentioned that in this draft you did something a little different. You went for 2 quarterbacks in the first 3 picks, O'Hara and Rattler, but then you went 10 consecutive picks without another quarterback until taking Malik Willis in round 14. And then 3 of your next 4 picks were actually quarterbacks. So where we were talking in May that there was value quarterback down the line, and obviously I think we all see that. Did that kind of play into that trend that you had within the draft where you went 10 picks where you were either wide receiver, running back, or you even threw a tight end in there?
Yeah, so part of it was kind of like in poker. I don't want to. We've played together a few times. That was our 3rd draft that we've done best ball. We're starting to kind of pick up on each other's trends a little bit. Everybody knows that Andrew was going to go after some UCLA guys and some Illinois guys and that type of thing. So really, it was to try to keep. I wanted to take some guys at this point that I hadn't taken shares of in the first 2. 1, to hedge my bet a little bit off the first 2 drafts, and 2, to kind of keep those drafting around me on their toes a little bit. But yeah, it was a scenario where I was really happy with the first 2 quarterbacks that I got. Spencer Rattler in round 1, Asher O'Hara in round 3. And so I thought, okay, now I can rest on QBs for a while. And kind of like Chris has mentioned, there's a sweet spot with quarterbacks a little bit on down the road, it seems like, from some of the drafts that we've done. And I decided to try to dig back into those for my QB, 3, 4, and 5. And we alluded to Kyle Francis going with the strategy of of the no QB draft, essentially. Wait till round 20 before he selects QB, which is a wild thought in and of itself. But honestly, if like Chris mentioned, if he would have gone like round 15 before he starts picking up dudes, I think QB wise, he could be looking pretty good. It's right in there in that rounds, 10, 12, 15, where I think that those second, third tier quarterbacks starts coming off the board that are really nice. I went with Malik Willis as the first one off the board, and mostly just to piss Chris off a little bit because I knew that's one of his guys.
It worked.
I've had a target on Malik Willis in every draft, particularly the first one. Chris, I think you might have taken him in the first draft, and I've missed him out. Next draft, if I want him, I'm just going to have to go up early and get him. But I mentioned you took 3 quarterbacks in a span of 4 rounds. You took Chris Reynolds in round 17, and Chris Reynolds, quarterback at Charlotte, is one of those guys that I feel could be one of those high floor guys, maybe not necessarily high ceiling, but I think in a best ball format, for me, he's one of the ideal quarterbacks that I would target as my quarterback 3 or quarterback 4. So I really like that pick. I mean, I don't know what you guys feel about Chris Reynolds, but for me, that seems to be one of those ideal mid-round picks that just offer great value. He's not going too early. He's not falling too late. Like, it's such a sweet spot. Like you mentioned, I mean, man, if Kyle jumped on somebody like that in round 15, 16, or 17, as opposed to just maybe waiting until round 20, which he waited to round 20, and he said afterwards that he did it. He probably wouldn't do it again, but he felt okay for some of the quarterbacks that he had. I think Reynolds is tremendous value in that area.
Yeah, I like Reynolds, and going back to Malik Willis, but one of the reasons why I think this probably Chris kind of falls in line with this too, because he and I have had shares of Willis in every draft so far. I think he's a good fit for a best ball scenario because he's got an easy schedule. He plays in a pretty high octane type offense. There's going to be games where I probably wouldn't draft him as high as I'm taking him right now in a standard league, because he's going to have some weeks where he's laying a few eggs. And in best ball, he's also going to have some weeks that are big weeks. And so if he's your QB 3 or 4 and he's coming up with a handful of big weeks, that's really all you can ask for. But yeah, I think Chris Reynolds is somebody that's got really good value. Where I took him, I think, like you said, in round 17 or something like that. I really wasn't looking for a QB at that point, but I was like, you know what? This is good value for him. I'm not going to let somebody like this slide all the way to 20 and Kyle will go ahead and take him.
Yeah, that was one of the few guys that I had topping Q that went within 5 picks of when I was on the clock. Reynolds was one of those guys. Chris, we mentioned the philosophy that Kyle incorporated where he waited to round 20 to get a quarterback in this draft. For you waited what? You didn't pick a quarterback till round 9. You stayed away yourself. You were the other guy as well that didn't have a quarterback on your roster through 8 picks. You picked up Miles Brennan as your first quarterback in round 9. So you mentioned you kind of got on that horse too, right? Where you kind of playing the waiting game, and then when you saw Brennan, it was just I kind of felt like you had to, because I feel Dylan Gabriel in round 11 was just as good as a pick as Brennan was in round 9. So you stayed away for a while. You went 9 rounds before you got a quarterback. So kind of tell us what you were thinking.
I didn't really have a set number, like a round of which I wanted to go quarterback, but I thought like Brennan was one of the last guys that had like the potential to pop as like a superstar, huge producer. Like, will he like likely do it? Probably not. But like at LSU, I feel like that's a high floor. I went with Gabriel, another guy who like could pop for a huge game, but for the most part, how UCF spreads around their offense with like 35 people deep in offense, like he's probably just going to have a high floor for the most part. And I think like this is probably a little bit relevant earlier on, but like how you draft really should determine where you're going with like your later picks. Like me going receiver heavy early for 4 in a row, like in what world does a high floor guy in round 14 really get rostered by me? Probably not that often. So like I need to go high upside towards the end of the draft. At the same time, reverse, right? Like at running back, I need to go high floor because I'm really trying to roster a ton of receivers. Like I need guys that'll like just get me 12, 15 points. And the more we draft with everybody, the more like we start having to like draft up. Like Kevin Marks, I was like, you know what? I'm just not even going to deal with it. I could use a huge pop at running back. I'm taking him early. Mike was pissed about it. But it's interesting how it works. But at the end of the day, I think like the QB sweet spot is really those early teens, like Clayton Tune. I like, you know, I wasn't honest. It's kind of crazy, but like I'm not that thrilled with like a Bo Nix. But like I felt with the new offensive coordinator Chad Morris, I believe like it's worth a shot considering I waited so long.
I feel like what's interesting is you went first 4 picks wide receivers, but then when you got to round 9, you took 5 quarterbacks in your next 8 picks. So you went really quarterback heavy during that round. During those rounds, you went Brennan, Dylan Gabriel, Clayton Tune, DTR at UCLA, and Bo Nix. So you're right. I think you have 5 guys right there. You only need 2 to pop every week. You've got some guys that like, and this is to Nate's point with Malik Willis. You don't need them to be consistent every week. You just need them to pop several times throughout the season in any particular week. And then that's where the value really kind of pays off. Now, I'm going to come back to that Kevin Marks handcuff because this was a topic of conversation on our last show, but I'm going to wait on that. But Nate, we're going to go over to you real quick for this one, because of the 3 guys of the 3 of you that I have on, you're the one that seems to value tight end more than any of them, more than anybody. You have a tight end on your roster in all 3 drafts by round 8. So you kind of jump on the tight end a little earlier than both Chris and Andrew. So what's your thoughts with tight ends, not necessarily just in this best ball draft, but with drafts in general? I'm assuming you like to target one of the top tight ends in a lot of the drafts that you're in.
Actually, it's fairly specific to best ball. Kind of like with my strategy with Malik Willis, that I would not draft him nearly this high in a standard season-long league. I don't generally take tight ends quite as early as I do in best ball. But in best ball, I want a balanced team, and I want a tight end that can go out there and has the potential to get me 15 any given week. So I think that there's a tier of about 6-7 tight ends where we start to see a little bit of a shelf and a significant fall off at that point. So I'm trying to at least get one of those guys. And who knows, maybe next draft I'll go ahead and try to snipe 2 of them and not have to worry about tight end the rest of the draft. Yeah, it's not something I would do in a standard league.
I actually agree with you on that. I think, and this is just my philosophy on these best ball leagues. I think, and I'm, here's a tell of mine. I think that tight end is a position that can really call with rosters as deep as they are, with as many positions as we start. Tight end may be the one position where you can really pull away from the field at any particular week and really make up some ground, because if you have a consistent tight end every week, not everyone's going to get consistency from their tight end. And I also feel the same way about defense special teams. I almost feel in this best ball format, I almost feel naked, however you want to say it, if I don't have, or I'm not getting my full potential with point, if I don't have at least 3 defensive special teams, because, I jumped on, Nate, you got Clemson, I think, early this time, and they were Georgia. You took Georgia, Clemson. Georgia.
Yeah, I got real weird. I took 2.
Yeah, I had been targeting them early. I like Georgia. I like going 3 defense special teams just for the simple fact that we don't know which one's going to hit every single week, and I do think defense special teams can really cause some damage or really help make up some ground in these best ball formats. But Chris, Andrew, what thoughts on tight end and difference in philosophy, best ball versus redraft?
You can go ahead, Andrew. I'll let you start.
I'll take that first. So I was totally planning on trying to grab Granson or potentially Kuth in the 7th round, but 4 of the top tight ends 3 went right before me in the 7th round, and I wasn't really feeling Kohler, so I passed on the position for then. But I think personally, after probably the top 3 of Pitts, Granson, and Kuth are gone, I'm not super interested in the tight end position. But if I can get one of them in that area, I'm totally down for it. I'm here for it, so maybe I'll have to move around up or 2 going forward. But after that, I'm good. I'm good waiting for a little while at least. When it comes to defense special teams, I learned something new this time, that kicking is actually part of our our defense special teams. That shows how much right up on our format. But if the scoring mirrors at all your bowl challenge, your bowl leagues, there are some wild defensive scores to be had in this. So having those elite defensive special teams is definitely advantageous. I've been totally cool kind of targeting, I think, Boise in at least a couple of them, in Illinois as well, largely just because their schedule opens so nicely. And I think that Boise, A, anytime they're on the blue turf, and B, that I think they have a fairly decent amount of soft matchups that they should be able to push around and score a lot of points on, and not give up that many points on. So I'm cool with those defensive special teams. And the idea of going up and trying to target one of the elite SEC or Clemson or Ohio State type defenses never really entered my brain. But you, Joe, you make a compelling argument, and Nate, on why it makes a lot of sense, specifically in this format.
Yeah, Chris, what about yourself? Thoughts? Tight ends, defense, special teams. Go ahead and knock them both out.
I have a hard time investing a lot, especially if it's not Granson or the Utah guy. Like I get Pitts as I'm not even gonna try it. I get Pitts as like an NFL type guy, but I don't see him having like the upside enough for me to pick him where he's going. I just don't have a great feel for tight end besides that. So I'd rather honestly take, and I haven't done it yet, and I kind of right after the draft or right at the end of it, I was tweeting about like, is it worth it to take 3 of tight ends or defenses? And in my head, and I don't have enough time to look at the numbers, but like, what are the differences between like defense number 20 and defense number 40? Or what's the the differences between those in terms of average per game doesn't seem to be a whole lot. So I think I'd rather honestly take 3 towards the end and play my bye weeks right and just hope, because things get weird with defenses. I took Notre Dame hoping, with their independent schedule that I get some nice soft matchups randomly in like week 11 type stuff. And I took Tennessee knowing that they're going to play some smaller schools early and get shellacked by Alabama. But hopefully Notre Dame can cover it for me. But I don't have a great feel for it. I'd rather take 3 than draft one early. I mean, just thinking, I'm going to look real quick here, but like looking at guys around the 3 big tight ends, and Nakia Watson, who's got risk, but if he pops is huge. Theo Weiss, same thing, Rambo. So I guess I can see the advantage of going tight end if you love the guy, but the upside is just kind of crazy at similar guys of that round.
Yeah, I mean, I took Keithy out of Utah in round 7. The one thing that's really interesting, whether you're doing best ball draft or whether in a redraft, once when that first guy takes tight end, the dominoes fall, right? So It's like 4 or 5 come off the board. And I find sometimes in the redraft leagues, depending on, how experienced the leagues are, it happens with defense special teams. So I can't tell you how many leagues where I've seen where guys take a defense special teams and then, 4 of the next 8 picks were defense special teams. And I love that because that means I'm getting more position players fall back to me if those tight ends and defense special teams start coming off the board. So yeah, I went up and got Keithy, who I think back in May, maybe Nate, you said that was your tight end 1. It's my tight end 1. I grabbed him, and then I basically played for tight end 2 later in the draft to just avoid the bye week. And so that's how I kind of knocked out tight end as well. I went early for a good one, which I felt was a good one of value. And then from there, I just stayed away and stocked up on running back, receiver, and then quarterbacks as well. Andrew, interesting. Here we go. 16 rounds in the first draft before you took your quarterback 2. In the second draft, you went 9 rounds before you took your quarterback 2. But in this draft, you took 3 quarterbacks in the first 8 rounds. That was different from your first 2 drafts. You were sitting on quarterbacks on the first 2 drafts. Was that just the way that things fell to you? You saw guys that you really loved? Because for you, that was a break from the norm of what you did in the first 2 drafts. 3 of your first 8 picks were quarterbacks in this one. You took, let's say you got Jamie Newman in 3. You followed that up with Buechele in 4, and then you took Cordero in round 8, 1 pick before me. And I was actually that was another guy that I had top of queue. That really was the only guy in the entire draft that got sniped right before me was Cordero. But you took 3 in the first 8 rounds. You
flatter, Joe. But so I had little intention of grabbing 3 that quickly. I knew I wanted to get Newman simply because I didn't have him in any of my other drafts, and if I was able to grab Pickens, I wanted to have that hookup. I do regret taking Bouchel that early. I wanted to wait probably another round on him, but I was afraid Chris was gonna grab him ahead of me in the 5th if that happened, and that kind of torpedoed a couple things I was planning on doing, incidentally, just because I lost out on some value with picks that followed. But I was initially planning on trying to scoop Logan Bonner in like the 10, 11, 12, 13 type range, and then backing it up with Hatcher later on. But I've kind of pivoted out of that and just decided that there, in that round 8 to or 7 to 10 type range, I had a lot of receivers I was planning on targeting. I figured I'll get them when I get them, but right now there's enough depth in that middle receiver range where I can go up and get Cordero and then worry about receiver later. And then it kind of came back to bite me as well, as a lot of the receivers that I was targeting started to go off in that range.
Well, through your 3 drafts, I think we have a trend, and I'm going to put this out there for everybody to hear. But if Andrew is on the clock either before or after you, there is a slim chance he's probably taking a running back early and sniping you. You only took 1 running back in the first 5 rounds of all 3 drafts. So really, you're just echoing what we've said on every show. Basically, there's a lot of depth at running back. You've taken running back into sort of the past round 5. You've only had 1 running back on your roster in all 3 drafts through the first 5 rounds. Really, is that really just kind of what we've been talking about, just kind of fall in line what we've been talking about with depth at the position?
So it definitely does to a degree, especially in the first couple of rounds. I was planning on trying to grab someone like Najee Harris or Hawkins, Sermon, or Brooks in like that 3-4 range, but again, I kind of panicked and went up and got Bouchel. So then my RB1 ended up being Brendan Knox. I'm cool with it, and I've been a fan of his since he kind of burst on the scene at the end of I guess 2018, and I don't question that he can follow it up and have a big year this year, but enough to really justify being the top running back on my team. It's going to take a lot to get there, I think, considering how much volume he saw last year and what we saw his output be, and he still wasn't like in that true RB1 range. So yeah. If you could poke some holes in my team, my RBs are probably the area to do it. But overall, I'm not super uncomfortable with having Knox and Verdell as my 1 and 2, especially in Bestball, with Verdell already showing that he can boom as hard as anyone booms at the running back position, and now potentially getting a boost from Moorhead coming over as the offensive coordinator.
I'm ready for all you guys to just change it. You're going 4 running backs in the first 5 rounds next draft now. I know it now. All right, so look, now we're going to kind of get into the fun part. We're going to go over some of those players we have buyer's remorse, players we think gain in steam, losing interest. We're going to go through all that. We're going to kind of do a little rapid fire. But first, I'll start off with a little quiz. And really, Nate, I don't have a question for you here, but I'm going to go ahead and ask this to both Andrew and Chris. There is a player that each of you all have taken in all 3 drafts. Do you know which one it is?
Armstrong, Jafar Armstrong.
I know which one it is.
It is. It's Jafar Armstrong. I had to wait until the end of the 3rd draft because you went later in this draft than you did in the first 2.
I found I could get him late, which is interesting. The trends are ridiculous. Like, at what point the DTR was about to be a 3rd rounder at one point, and I nabbed him at like 13, and then like I got Kevin Marks 1 round at the one draft at the very end, and I ended up getting them, and like I went up like another 6-7 rounds. So as much as I feel like the trends are there to like, hey, you got to scoop the guy before everybody else, all of a sudden the guy just drops. It's like Andrew says, you know what? I'm not going to go all in on DTR, and then nobody else wants him, so then you get him wherever you want.
Yeah, you got DTR in round 14. I think at that point it was almost like Andrew was trying to find out, okay, how much did I overinvest the first two drafts that we did? How far will this guy actually drop? I think he was just doing research for the next draft. That's what it was. He was just passing for research.
That's it. What, Andrew, what about you? You know the guy that you've drafted in all 3 drafts?
I feel like I draft 80% of the same team every time, so it's tough, but I'll guess Kyle Phillips.
It's Chris Brown.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. You drafted Chris Brown, running back in Cal, in all 3 drafts. I'm pretty sure. I thought I double checked that, but I'm pretty sure you had him.
I'm sure you're right, and I'm sure you're right, and that echoes what I was talking about before, where I feel like, assuming he doesn't run into some bad injury luck, which he's somewhat likely to based on his bruising style, he should represents a very high floor given the amount of volume that he should see. He's active in the passing game. That offense definitely seemed like it improved throughout last year, and I think if I am trying to balance upside with floor, he represents a fairly nice floor in a best ball format that can counteract some of the uncertainty that I'm trying to introduce in association with my upside.
Yeah, I really like the guy. I think I like the pick. I think the offense is going to evolve a little bit. I think he's going to get used a little bit more often and consistently in that offense. I do like his upside. So I no argument with me on that pick. I just thought it was interesting. But we did talk about, to Nate's point, about whether or not you were letting DTR drop. There's a player that I drafted in all 3 drafts, TJ McDaniel, from the running back from SMU. Obviously we know Xavier Jones and Freeman have moved on. There's a ton of carries to be had. I know that there are some others that may think that Bentley may come in as well. But even with those 2 guys both gone, I feel that opens up a big opportunity for McDaniel. But, in the first, and this is where getting comfortable drafting with other guys and learning their tendencies comes into play. In the first draft, I took him in round 8. In the second draft, I got him in round 8. And then in this draft, I waited all the way until round 13 to get him because I just had a feeling nobody was going to pick him. So that was a player that I sat on this draft and said, okay, enough's enough, round 13. So that, Chris, kind of plays into your point. Once we kind of know each other's tendencies and the players we like, we either have to go up to get certain players, or in the case for you with Armstrong, or me with McDaniel, you can just kind of sit back and get them at a better value a little bit later in the draft. So let's go into some guys that maybe we have a little bit buyer's remorse. I've heard a few names on the show, but Chris, we'll kind of start with you. Buyer's remorse on any particular player, maybe 1 or 2 picks in this draft or maybe not buyer's remorse, just one that maybe you just pulled the trigger a little too soon.
It's nothing like calling your first round pick some buyer's remorse, but in hindsight, I wished I would have been later in the first round and Roberson would have been perfect. I was kind of set on him. I really liked him. I kind of thought one of the other guys would go before him. And I was just so dead set on a receiver that I ended up going Roberson. Is Chase and Rondell going to probably do better? Probably. But I figured Roberson would fit the mold of what I was doing. And at the end of the day, Andrew always says, go get your guy, believe in the guy that you have. And that's
do you feel better now knowing that both Andrew and I were targeting him, thinking we were getting him in round 1?
No, not at all. I was actually going to say earlier, guys, I'm right here. You were going to get him with the 12th pick. I got him at 6. Thanks a lot. Just keep that to yourself. Okay.
What about you, Nate?
I don't know. I was looking at my roster. There's a couple that I didn't love. Shai Smith, South Carolina. I do like the fact that Bobo's taken over as offensive coordinator. After I took him, I was just like, I don't know. I mean, there's probably other better options with that. I don't know that he's a super high ceiling guy. He just doesn't fit the mold of what I love. But at that point, I was just like, I'm gonna take a flyer on a guy that I haven't gotten so far.
What about you, Andrew?
So I would say that it's largely 2 guys from the more, I guess, material draft capital portions of the draft. One, I think that I went up a little high for Devin Brumfeld, especially given the uncertainty of whether or not he'll be the guy with Wilmore. And given that I really had no intention of handcuffing Wilmore. So spending a 10th round draft pick on maybe a little better shot than a coin flip in hindsight maybe wasn't the best idea. But additionally, so The idea of Quentin Morris sounds amazing to me because it's really just a receiver that qualifies at tight end. Now, that's kind of where the greatness of that idea ends, because he plays in an offense that's been largely dysfunctional, and his quarterback, who wasn't really that good to begin with, just transferred out of the program. So I question how much fruit that tree will actually bear. But again, the idea sounds really amazing.
Now, before we get into players that we think are really kind of picking up steam, I'm going to get your opinions on these guys. And we could be really quick around the horn. Mike and I did a show not that long ago where we really went in on the Jared Dokes, Jerome Ford issue. And then all of a sudden, Jerome Ford went from round 7 in draft 1, round 9 in draft 2, to dropping all the way around 12 in draft 3. We kind of all had a take back on the last show about that. I'm just kind of throwing out some trends here. But David Bell is one that I want to kind of spend a minute on because he's gone in round 5 in all 3 drafts. Is that about right for y'all's value? Is it too soon? I kind of feel I love Bell, and I love his size over Rondale Moore. But Chris, Andrew, you brought this up earlier in the show. I think I'm just not sold at what's going to happen with quarterback, or maybe Chris, I'm not sure if you brought it up. I'm good with Rondale Moore because he's kind of catch those balls out of the slot. He can take some handoffs. They can get him the ball a whole bunch of different ways. Bell's the guy that I'm really concerned about going up too early and getting. And for me, I don't see myself getting any shares of David Bell for as much as I like him if he's going early as round 5. What are y'all's thoughts on David Bell?
I get some pretty strong feelings on this one. I actually don't have a problem with it. I think round 5 is about right. I think he's, of all the wide receiver 2s on their team in the entire country, I think he's probably the best wide receiver 2 out there because there's a clear 1 and 2 for Purdue. And if you look at the historical data on Jeff Brom and his trends in the passing game and the offense that he runs, you can actually get some pretty massive value out of the wide receiver 2 in his offense. So even if Rondale Moore does perform at a wide receiver 1 level, first round level, I still think you can get some pretty nice value out of David Bell, even though you're drafting him knowing he's the wide receiver 2 in basically, surrounded by guys that are potential wide receiver 1 players.
Right. Chris, Andrew, any thoughts on David Bell in round 5?
I'm not anti David Bell. I just it's one of those things where I just haven't done enough research, like Nate just said, to he had just had some nice numbers or nice ideas behind it with Brom. I just haven't done enough to warrant me taking him at 5th round. I obviously he's a great player, but at 5th round I probably in 5th, 6th, 7th round I just looked at it as just this weird receiver land where it's just this weird area of who's available. It's just, there's this weird desert land, and Bell's probably the best of all of them, but I just, at 5th round, I'll just end up never getting him. And that's fine.
Yeah. What about you, Andrew? Any problem with David Bell in round 5?
Yeah, Nate makes a compelling argument, but I think my thoughts are that there's always going to be either some wide receiver 1 still available in an offense that I like, or a QB or an RB that is set up to star in an interesting system that I'll take ahead of him. So he'll probably never be high enough on my board where I take him in that round.
Yeah, there are 3 hypothetically wide receiver 2s that went before David Bell, who we label as a wide receiver 2. Tyler Vaughn's, Amon-Ra St. Brown, the pair at USC, the pair at De'Ami Brown and Daz Newsome over at North Carolina, and then Waddle and Smith over at Alabama. And I think the one thing that we can all agree on is with those 2, probably just better quarterback play. And I think that may be what's probably for me is turning me off on Bell compared to those other wide receiver 2s that are kind of going before there. Let's go into Nate real quick for you. KJ Costello, right? You've taken him in a couple of drafts. What's your thoughts on KJ Costello? Because I want to say where KJ Costello is getting drafted in rounds 4, rounds 5, and round 6 in these 3 drafts. You've taken him in 2 or 3. I kind of feel if Costello was the quarterback look, Washington, when Leach was at Washington State the past 2 years, had we known who his quarterback 1 was in stone, that guy probably was going to be a first-round, second-round pick at the latest. We pretty much know that Costello is going to be his quarterback 1. Are we kind of sleeping on Costello a little too much with him going in round 4, 5, and 6, knowing he's more than likely the starter in Leach's offense?
Yeah, potentially. I think people just have concerns about the fact that Leach is going from Pac-12 play to, SEC West play. I think that's the biggest deal, is that he's, Washington State struggled against Washington and Oregon at times and that type of thing. And now he's got to face LSU, Alabama, Auburn, Texas A&M on a week-to-week basis. But I still think that there's really good, top 4 round value with Costello. He's probably the best quarterback talent-wise that Leach has had, honestly. I know he's got a couple guys in the NFL right now, but Costello can flat out sling it. And they're going to be playing from behind. I mean, Leach is just going to put out a guy that puts close to 30 fantasy points out of his quarterback every year.
Yeah, I think we're actually sleeping on him a little bit. I think the one thing, and I made this point on a previous show, I think I did it on our show in May, and I think I did it again with Mike. When you look at the SEC West in general now, we can't think of the SEC West as the way it was 5 years ago. You've got Alabama with offense, LSU with offense. You've got Briles now over there in Arkansas. You've got Kiffin and Levy down at Ole Miss. You've got Leach at Mississippi State. You've got Chad Morris at Auburn. It is not the SEC West from 5 or 6 years ago. So yeah, the defenses are going to be good, but the offenses are going to be a lot more wide open. And so I do think you're going to see schools like Mississippi State and Ole Miss, even against some of the better defenses on any given week, can have some good numbers. So it's definitely not the SEC West from 5 or 6 years ago. Let's get into this. I think this is an interesting question. We're going to go into players that we think are losing a little steam. Our interest is waning a little bit on them, and maybe players that are kind of, we're believing in a little bit more as the spring and summer goes through. But let's start with the ones that we're losing interest on. Andrew, let's start with you. Are there any players that from April until now you don't highly regard as, now as you did back in April? Anybody kind of slipping on your board? And really, we know it's for no particular reason because we haven't seen any practices, but just gut feeling, anybody kind of sliding down your board now compared to where you had them in April?
2 guys I took in April that I, at minimum, don't really have much interest in taking at the price points where I took them then are Derek King and Jerrion Ealy. I think I got King in the 2nd round in April and Ealy in something like the 7th round. And just with King, I would say I'm just not super interested in burning a 2nd round pick on a quarterback, and where I know I can either wait for a 3rd round and get Newman, or just wait a lot later and get someone like Cordero, Bushell, etc. So I'm just losing interest in taking him at that point, I would say, and it just doesn't slide in with the strategy I'm looking to act on. And then with Ealy, so I'm pivoting, I think, away from a strategy that I was executing on it definitely in April and somewhat in May, where I was okay with at the running back position trying to target guys that were likely to put out just a few boom weeks, and maybe that was about it. How we talked about with like QB3, QB4. I think with running back, I'm not sure that if that's really the strategy I'm looking for, especially when those boom weeks are likely to come early in the season, potentially before we get into conference play. I'm going to probably have enough output from my better running backs where I don't necessarily need those guys to slot in. So if I take Ealy, who most likely is going to have a challenging conference schedule and has some other factors to deal with too, which is maybe competition from Snoop Connor, I feel like I'm taking him just with the idea and hope that he's getting 15 carries or so a game, and B, that knowing that upwards of like half of his schedule, he's probably not going to be a guy that's in my lineup. So for burning a single-digit round draft pick on him, that idea is looking less and less interesting for me.
I'm on board with both of those. I don't think I'm going to have King if he's going in round 2 in any draft. And I do agree with Ely. I think I've made that point on one of the previous shows that I've been on. I just don't know. For me, I feel like maybe he's going a little too early. Nate, how about yourself? Any players that you're kind of losing interest, waning on over the last couple of months?
A couple that I took in the first, and kind of like what Andrew mentioned in the April draft. I took Tyquan Thornton from Baylor in round 12. I just feel like Baylor's just kind of got too many weapons that they're going to use. They're just going to spread the ball around a little bit more now than maybe what I was anticipating a couple months ago. I took Brennan Eagles in that same draft. Since then, they've obviously added another wide receiver with Black out on the outside that will probably steal some targets from him. The only other one would probably be in the Florida State backfield. I thought that it would maybe be a little bit more of a 50-50 push between those two, Corbin and LeBourne. And I actually think Corbin's probably going to get a little bit, maybe more than what I anticipated a couple months ago, just from what I've been reading online. I think he just fits more what that staff's looking for. So even though I drafted Khalil and LeBourne in this most recent draft, but I waited forever to take him. So, but I definitely feel like that's less of a 50-50 split than it was a couple months ago.
Yeah, I like I'm aligned with all of those guys, particularly with Corbin, who I do think is going to get. I don't think LeBourne's necessarily a bad fit for the offense. I think he I think he fits the offense well. I just think Corbin. I just like his upside a little bit more. I think he's a better fit for that particular offense. So I'm on board with that. Chris, how about yourself?
Always good when all of the players I just drafted are listed by Nate and Andrew here with players are down on. But guys I would be cooling on for sure, and I hate beating this horse of like quarterbacks, but I just threw open the April draft, and I just, outside the top 4 guys, and as much as I'm like anti-Rattler, like, Howell, Rattler, Fields, Ellinger, outside those 4, like, I just don't see a reason to go quarterback anywhere near high, those higher rounds. Bouchel, Mond was a guy I took in the 5th rounds in the April draft, and he just went in the 12th round. Like, there are guys that don't do enough with the big upside you would want to take out of those earlier rounds that I don't see myself doing it, especially seeing who you can get in those like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 rounds. Like, why bother with, like, I like Bouchel, and like I'm excited for SMU's offense, obviously, but like I just don't see a reason to take him top 5 rounds, or like a King, Hartman. This guy's like, I think they're good players and they're going to be great fantasy players, but like I can get probably 85 to 90% of that guy's production with like a mixture of Gabriel, DTR, and Nix dug in like the 12 to 15 round range. So I'd rather just do that and try to hit on those flex guys instead.
I think the one guy for me that I'm kind of losing a little interest in the longer we go and the more homework that I did and research is Josh Johnson, running back at UL Monroe. I went back and dipped into the preseason fantasy draft guide from 2019 and realized that UL Monroe, not only did they have Caleb Evans last year, but they were also returning 5 offensive linemen in 2019. And he had a tremendous year. He was probably one of the better free agent pickups throughout the waiver wire pickups throughout the year if he wasn't drafted last year. But I looked at Caleb Evans is gone, and they basically have to rebuild the entire offensive line, and it is UL Monroe. So that does scare me a little bit. I think Josh Johnson is a guy that I think I'm losing more interest in, where I think I've got him ranked around the 40 range right now. I think I'm staying away just for those simple points that I don't like. If you told me that Wisconsin was rebuilding their offensive line, I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but I went into that draft guide as well from 2019. Wisconsin was one of those teams last year, even Oklahoma, that were returning 2 or fewer starters. I don't worry when Wisconsin has to rebuild the offensive line because they have guys ready to go. But a school like UL Monroe that has to rebuild the offensive line for a team that may not win more than 2 or 3 games, that really concerns me. So let's go to guys that are picking up steam, though. Andrew, for you, April to now, without maybe some of the few obvious ones, and maybe you guys have them on a list, like a Rico Bussey, who has now signed with Hawaii. He wasn't signed when we did this draft in April, and people were kind of taking shots on him being in the transfer portal. Guys picking up steam in your mind, gut feeling, just have a better feeling. You've learned more about him, heard more about him today than you did back in April. Let's start with you.
So there were two guys that I definitely wanted to try and get in this draft that I baked into my plan, that I intentionally was looking to take them a couple rounds higher than they'd previously gone and still didn't get them. So I guess I'll have to try even harder next time. But they are Asher O'Hara and Khalil Shakir. So O'Hara, I think in the previous draft, he went something like the 6th round. And granted, we had 11 guys versus 12 for this one. Right. But he went in the 3rd, I think, in this one, which, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense just given he ran for over 1,000 yards. He's in a system that throws the ball around. There's nothing representative of a serious complement at running back. So he is the entire offense in a system that should be in tons of shootouts and plays really fast and puts up a ton of points. So he's everything we want in a fantasy quarterback. And I am hell bent on trying to get him on a bunch of my teams before the season kicks off. For Shakir, I think that he could be everything John Hightower was last year, and even more considering they manufactured touches for him through end arounds and stuff like that. And I was just reading it today or the other day that one of his best attributes is that he's a jump ball specialist. So if you're getting touches near the line of scrimmage and the things you do best is go up for balls that should be resulting in touchdowns, and on top of that, you're projected to take over the number 1 spot at receiver in the Boise offense. That sounds really good to me. But I think he was going in the 9 to 10 range previously, and he went like in 6th this time. So I guess our league mates are aligned with me on both those guys. But even though they got pushed up, I'm super interested in both of them.
Yeah, he actually went in round 6 of this draft. In the Bestball 2 draft, he went in round 9. So he did go 3 rounds higher in this draft than he went in the second draft. I'm not finding him in the first one, but my guess is he probably would have gone somewhere. He went in round 7. So, yeah, it looks like he's kind of bouncing in that 7 to 10 range. How about you, Chris?
I think Trey Sermon is like an obvious one. I think he's like jumped big time over the last couple months. I think USC receivers are huge now with Kyle Ford, and it's crazy. Like, hey, receiver 3 gets hurt. I believe he got hurt right just like a week or two ago. But like it just kind of cements those two guys. It's like, sure, like they might not go crazy each week, but man, are they going to be consistent? But sticking with it, like the receiver version of Kevin Marks to me, and I kind of was chatting with Mike about this the other day, is Drake London. Like, I feel like that guy is like, if you pick him, he's probably going to be used like 3 to 4 weeks. And if anybody gets hurt or misses time, like he's going to be in your lineup every single week. That's a guy I would love to have in like the mid-teens, later teens level. And then I'll just throw one more real quickly out there. It would be like Kevin Austin, the Notre Dame receiver. I thought I kind of reached on him. I talked to Mike about it, and he was like, dude, I was about to take him. So it made me feel better about it. But I think a lot of people compare him to like a Claypool, which obviously was a great season last year. I think he's going to start really rising up.
Yeah, I think Austin was a good pick. I do like Austin. I'm on board with the Drake London pick. You know, going into the season, the one thing that I was debating was London or will Brew McCoy actually come in, and how will he affect it? We know that Vaughns and St. Brown are more of the 6'6", 6'1" receivers. London, I believe, 6'6". And I think Brew McCoy himself is about 6'3". So both of those guys offer some size. So for me, that's where I saw the position battle coming in. But knowing and seeing what London has done already, it's hard not to see him being on that field as the true wide receiver 3. But, man, it just really speaks to the talent that USC. And then also you mentioned on the show as well about the Kevin Marks handcuff. And I didn't bring this up earlier, but I like Elijah Mitchell down at Louisiana Lafayette. And I do feel, and something that I slept on in this draft, I wanted to get Trey Regis as my handcuff for Elijah Mitchell, because I almost feel like if if Jared Patterson and Kevin Marks is exhibit A, 1A to the handcuff rule, I feel that Trey Regis, Elijah Mitchell might be exhibit 1B, because if Elijah Mitchell goes down, and because Regis was a little banged up last year, but if Mitchell goes down or if Regis goes down, one of those two guys go down, the other one really stands to get a ton of carries in that UL offense. What about you, Nate? Any guys that go ahead. I'm sorry, you go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, you're good. I've been subjected to so much weak Fun Belt offense, and specifically Louisiana, that I've seen how they run out their running backs. And it's so strange that Regis starts every game. He gets the first series, and it seems like they cycle through. But Mitchell is the guy who consistently gets touchdowns, and so it's weird phrasing it as Mitchell, like Regis being the handcuff to him, because Regis, he's got amazing pedigree, right? I'm pretty sure he was like at least for the Fun Belt, he was a heralded recruit. He starts for their offense, but Mitchell is consistently the guy who leads the offense in touchdowns and yards.
Yeah, and I think Khalil was the running back 3 last year. I think all 3 of those guys had at least 100 touches, and Khalil had a lot for a running back 3. So I think people underestimate how run heavy that UL offense actually is. Nate, did we get to you with players picking up steam?
Yeah. I apologize if you guys hear my daughter kind of screaming in the background. She's getting ready for bed, so she's pretty happy.
Tis the time, man. That's just the way it is right now. We're good.
Yeah, so I actually agree with a lot of what Andrew and Chris said. What was fascinating about Kevin Austin is that I took him in the April draft in round 20, and then Mike took him in May in round 16, and then I think Chris got him in round 12. So he's actually shot up 12 rounds over the course of 2 months, essentially. So I think people are starting to kind of figure out Kevin Austin a little bit and the potential there. Shakir and London were guys that I've picked up in the past, and guys that I was trying to target again this draft. So I totally agree with some of those. I'll take the flip side of what Chris said with Sermon. I'll actually talk about Kennedy Brooks for a second. As an OU guy, I don't miss many snaps that he's in, and I've actually up till this point not been a big Kennedy Brooks fan. I think he's limited in his skill set. I don't find him to be big-time NFL potential. But like you mentioned, the entire offensive line returns. Trey Sermon does not. Stevenson suspended for 5 games, as we anticipate. There's not a whole lot of experience in that backfield outside of Kennedy Brooks. They're going to be more of a traditional Lincoln Riley offense, as you've seen with Baker Mayfield for a few years, a couple years ago, where there's not going to be as much running from the quarterback. So I actually think that Kennedy Brooks has a chance to be kind of a 1,300, 13 TD type guy. See a little bump in yards and touchdowns for him this year.
I agree with you. As a matter of fact, when I put the preseason fantasy draft guide out, Kennedy Brooks, I did get some questions coming in on Kennedy Brooks, and all the points you just made were exactly, and compound that with the fact that there is no Kyler Murray and there is no Jalen Hurts. We know that Rattler's going to be a little mobile, but that's why I do like Brooks. There's just not a lot in the way of competition for him getting carries early in the year when guys, a lot of fantasy owners really need their players to come true earlier on in the year when they need to get out the gate fast. Chris, go ahead, bud.
I was just going to say, Nate, do you have a hard time picking a running back that early that wears cotton long sleeve shirts under his jersey?
He's he's a rare breed. He likes to stay warm, I guess. I don't know.
Well, hey, look, guys, I certainly appreciate your time. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up. We're going to do one of these again. We've got a draft coming up next month. We've got another one coming up in July. So we may go ahead and do this again. I mentioned it earlier on the show, but obviously if you head over to the CFF site, we've got the preseason fantasy draft guide. It's a 55+ page PDF printable document. It's got the results from all 3 of our best ball drafts so far. A lot more player rankings, offensive line return starters, sleepers, you name it, it's in there, recruiting information. Go over to the CFF site, check that out. Go over to Fantrax and join some of the public leagues. Go ahead and start your leagues. We're inching closer to the college football season. It'll be here before we know it. Fingers crossed that everything works out and we're actually going to have a season. But head over to Fantrax, join a public league, create your league, go ahead and get started on that. And, for Andrew, for Chris, for Nate, my name's Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the CFF site. And we're going to see you guys. This group will be back next month after our July draft. Thanks again, guys, for joining in.